Billah wa salatu wa salam wa rasulullah. Family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, you have arrived to your digital dose of dopamine with a strong serving of unfiltered reality check by the man who needs no introduction. I am talking about your favorite YouTuber's favorite YouTuber, aka the Big Black Heart Attack, aka Negro Damas, aka Dolomite, aka Joe Ski Love, aka Tony Montana. Say hello to my Leo friend, also known as the Feachaz. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back, family. So before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a hella haters up in this piece. And family, I don't know what happened. I set this live up for YouTube and everything like that. And then when I went to go live, you know how it is on the Feachaz. We got the technical difficulties. This ain't no different. This ain't no different. We got the technical difficulties. And today we got a really special show for y'all today. Shout out to brother Mr. Middlepath. For y'all who don't know who Mr. Middlepath is, he's probably one of the most underrated YouTubers. And he's not really a YouTuber. He's kind of like me. Like he's on YouTube, but not necessarily YouTube. But he does really good videos and he has really good commentary. And he he shouted me out on one of his videos a couple of days ago. So we're going to react to that video. Just let me switch up the background here. So make sure you like, subscribe, and share. And you are watching the Black Muslim Grassroots, and we are going to get down to the nitty-gritty. So let me just pull this up here. 1 second, y'all. So Mr. Middlepath, he did a very short video. And we just want to do a quick react. Well, it's not going to be quick. Because the video itself, is even though it's short, it's a little bit on the deep side. And the video itself, it requires kind of like a detailed answer, right? So I'm going to show y'all this video first. Let me just pull this up here. 1 second, y'all. Let me just pull it up. Okay. All right. So this is Mr. Middlepath. Some of y'all might know him already. All right. If you don't know him, you just go subscribe to his channel. He has some really good content, right? But he doesn't really post regularly, But we're gonna check out what he's saying. Okay. So let's go over here now. Let's play this up.
This is Mr. Middlepath, and I'm just taking a drive. Wanted to record this quick video and share with you my opinions. I'm saying my opinions once again. I'm not saying these are facts. I'm not saying this will happen. I'm saying that this can happen, or that I could see how it could happen. And I want to talk about Donald Trump and my opinions on why his presidency will be the presidency of warfare and escalation, not the presidency of peace as some people are predicting. And I want us to think about specifically with Yemen. I think a lot about Yemen and Donald Trump. Thinking about Donald Trump's personality and the situation with Yemen and what it means. So let's think about this. Donald Trump is the president who portrays himself as law and order, hardcore, does what he says, means what he says, and he's not going to take any BS from anyone or let America get pushed around.
Yeah, he portrays himself as all these things, but as you know, he's pretty much the opposite of all of them, right? But it's all smoke and mirrors when it comes to Donald Trump. But I digress, right? Because, we got to keep the YouTube algorithms, happy. So I got to come in there and comment. Okay, let's keep watching, y'all.
Now you have Yemen, and Yemen is being funded by the Iranians, the Houthis. The Iranis are funding the Houthis, and the Houthis have the world's trade supply in a chokehold. We're talking about pretty much all of the ships that have the tankers for the liquid natural gas and the oil are all going around Africa instead of going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and into the Red Sea and then through the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean. So they've effectively chokehold the whole thing. This is a very big power move, guys. At the same time, Saudi Arabia, which is a neighbor of Yemen and is one of the pillars of the American empire in terms of the petrodollar and everything going on. One of the pillars of the American empire. They're starting to act more independent. Wants to go into Russia and China's arms and the whole BRICS agreement and everything. You have the UAE, which is also in America's sphere of influence, one of the first to normalize with Israel. And they too are going into China and Russia's arms, and there's some question marks there. At the same time, guys, Iran is too risky to invade. It's too risky. It's too much of a gamble for America to invade a country like Iran. They might win.
Okay, so as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts in this. Okay, but we're going to get down to it. Okay, so he's basically saying because the Houthis have blockaded the Gulf of Aden, right, or the Aden ports and the Red Sea and whatnot, which is essentially caused the trade routes to go all around way around Africa to reach Europe instead of going through the Suez Canal. Okay, that's one thing. And he's also talking about Iranian influence and things of that nature. Right, so let's keep watching now.
Win, but the cost is way too high. Iran combines the worst of Iraq geography and Afghanistan geography. Mountains and deserts, very large country, may or may not have nuclear weapons at this point, is very close and shares a border with Russia, has all these proxies surrounding it and has buffer zones, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. That's a very tall order to ask to conquer it. Yemen, on the other hand, is a small piece of land. It's not geographically connected with Iran, so it's harder for Iran to arm it. Further away from Russia and China, even though they're technically in the same network, one could say. Weaker, doesn't have nuclear missiles. Now, if America were to conquer the Houthis and conquer Yemen, they would set a message to Russia and China, don't mess with us, right? And people are thinking about this wrong. Like, oh, what about Taiwan? What about Ukraine? The war, the battle space is also the Middle East. Controlling the Middle East is controlling the territory. Sending a message to Saudi Arabia. Hey, don't think that you can, get away from your master so quick. Sending a message to the UAE. Better not try and get too independent. Don't play that stuff around here. You're still in our camp. Don't think that you're going anywhere. Control Iraq and Syria and have all your proxies there, but don't try to mess with us. We are still in control here. We are still in charge here. It stands to reason that America gains a lot if they successfully conquer Yemen. On the other hand, I can see the arguments against it. That you go into Yemen, you're going to get bogged down. You can't focus on a war with China or competing with China or so forth. And Taiwan, how are you going to hold on to Taiwan? Some decisions have to be made here. You can't hold on to everything. You're going to have to let go of other things. The reason a lot of people think that Donald Trump is going to be for peace is because mainly two reasons. He seems very sincere about stopping the war with Russia and Ukraine, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. I do believe he's sincere about stopping a war with Russia and Ukraine, but not because he's a anti-war guy, but because he wants to focus now more on China. By stopping the war in Russia and Ukraine, he can focus more on China.
I think that's giving him too much credit, but that's neither here nor there. Let's keep listening, y'all.
I don't think Putin is going to stop the war in Ukraine just because Donald Trump wants it, or just because Donald Trump has some amazing charisma powers. That's not what's going to happen. Russia has a good thing going on with this war in Ukraine, and they're going to want to make sure that they leverage it for maximum benefit. At the same time, people think that Donald Trump is going to stop the war in Israel, or they're very hopeful about the Israel-Palestine situation, simply because Donald Trump hates Netanyahu. But in reality, guys, Tel Aviv wants a Donald Trump presidency. Donald Trump has made it very clear that Biden is holding Israel back from winning the war, despite the fact that Biden really didn't hold back anything. He gave Israel everything they wanted, but still it wasn't enough for them. And Trump is promising that unlimited support for Israel to achieve its goals at the maximum capacity possible. So again, where are we getting this idea that he's going to muzzle Israel? He's going to tell Russia no more war. He's going to seek some type of arrangement with China so that things don't escalate about Taiwan. Where are we getting all of that? It's been the American way to basically conquer the smallest, weakest country, right? Look at the Cold War. Look at the war with Vietnam. Vietnam wasn't about Vietnam, it was about Russia, right? So this isn't going to be about Yemen and Yemen. This is going to be about China and Russia and sending a message to them like, hey, you can use your proxies to control the most vital choke point. Well, we're going to go after Yemen. Yemen is the lowest hanging fruit It's the weakest link in the chain. Out of all the proxy groups, like Hezbollah has a direct line to Iran. Iran is connected with Russia and bordering it, shares a border. China is very close. Iran has its own nuclear weapons. You can't attack China. You can't attack Iran. You can't attack Russia. Who do you attack? Who do you attack to regain authority and to regain power and to regain your number one status in the world? It's only Yemen. Yemen is the only answer here. So I know I might be upsetting some people by saying these things and people might not want to hear it, but nonetheless, I do think that it's very possible that a scenario like this takes place. Let me know what you guys think.
All right, so that's pretty much the end of this video, right? So the short answer from the Feachaz is no, Donald Trump will not attack Yemen. That's just a short answer. If we could just, you know. However, to get into detail, why, right? It's because Trump is a real estate guy. He's a real estate and a money laundering guy. He is not an oil oligarch or a logistics specialist. You know, he's not an empire guy. And he's always been a real estate and a money laundering guy. This is what he knows. So saying that he wants peace in Russia because he's sincere is giving him way too much credit. That's not why he wants peace in Russia. I don't like, it's a long story, which is what we're going to get into right now. Okay. Right. So you see here, there's a lot of moving parts. See, the brother, he talked about Iran, attacking Yemen. He talked about the Russian aspect. And we're going to get into these three major parts, inshallah. So the first thing we want to get into is Donald Trump's relationship with Russia. So in the 80s, okay, the Trump Tower, you know, as you know, was pretty much built or whatnot. Guys, I think it was built in the late 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But during the 80s was its heyday, right? And since the inception of the Trump Tower, since its inception, okay, it was inhabited by organized crime figures. Trump always used to like to work with gangsters and organized crime and all this kind of stuff, right? He himself, he especially liked to work with the mafia. Okay, this is what he was known for, right? So through Trump's search for cash in his real estate empire, he turned to the Russians, and throughout the 80s, he was basically partnering up with the Russians and whatnot through ways of immigration, which had transformed Trump's heartland of Brooklyn, particularly Brighton Beach, into a catch-rich venture from the Russian mafia. And if you guys know about the Russian mafia and the KGB, they're pretty much part and parcel. They work together, hand in hand, okay? And the Russian mafia in those days were protected by the Italians, because the Italians, they themselves used the Russian mafia because they were cash rich, right? To essentially, how do you say? Like, they seeded their operations. They seeded the Russian mob's operations. Okay. So from the early years of the Trump Tower years, he realized the benefit of working with mobsters and gangsters and things of this nature, right? So he made a deal with this guy. His name is David Bogdan, okay? You can look this up, okay? I'm not making this up. I'm not just speaking here, okay? David Bogdan, he was a Russian mob boss, and he ran one of the most lucrative scams for a commission for the Italian mob, okay? Which was the Russians. When they arrived here, one of their major scams was known as the Red Daisy gasoline tax scam. Okay. And what they did is that essentially they established hundreds and hundreds of shell companies, and they would buy gasoline stations. Okay. This is what they were doing back in the 80s. Okay. And just before the tax man came, right, when it came for taxes, they would declare bankruptcy and then sell it to another shell company. And through this process, when every single time the taxman came, they say, oh, well, that was the previous owner, and that was the previous owner. So they essentially tax evaded to the tune of billions of dollars per year in the 80s. Billions, okay? This is how they essentially, evaded billions of dollars in taxes, which saved them, of course, billions of dollars. So they have all this billions of dollars. So now they have to launder this money. So where do you think they turn to launder this money? Right? Right? This is a big thing. It's a big thing, because you got to understand the relationship between Donald Trump and the Russians and how this whole thing started. They went to Donald Trump and Trump Tower. So this mob boss, David Bogdan, he meets Donald Trump and he says, okay, I'll take 5 condos in your Trump Tower or whatnot, right? And this is how Trump realized how cash rich these gangsters were, and how he became very cash wealthy. Okay, so these mobsters would go, they would buy these condos, right, to launder their money, and then every single time, if the taxman came saying, well, where do you get this $10 million from? They just said, if they for example, they were selling $10 million worth of cocaine or whatever, they put it into that ABC corporation because of the scams they're running with the gas stations or some other anonymous corporations. And then they need to sell this cocaine. They have this cash. And when the taxman comes, what did they do? They said, oh, well, we sold our condos at Trump Tower. This is how this whole thing began, with his relationship with the Russians. Okay. And that's how their money became clean. You get it? Okay. So at this time, this is before the fall of communism. Okay. So the FBI in New York City at that time, they had a nexus, right? However, they weren't even able to find this stuff. Why? Because this laundering scam was done so perfectly that they weren't even able to catch it, right? Throughout the 80s, right? They were bringing in all this cash, and they weren't able to catch it. Even the IRS wasn't able to catch it. You get it? So there's a legal process. A concept is called it's known as the intentional blindness or deliberate blindness concept, right? That is that if there's a pattern and you can prove deliberate blindness, then you are guilty of this crime, right? So it's one thing if somebody does something, once or twice, but Donald Trump ended up doing this process 1,300 times. 1,300 times. He did this in the 80s. So now Gorbachev, he comes into power, right, in the 80s. So some of y'all might be old enough to remember Gorbachev, Nikolai Gorbachev, right? And he was very friendly and favorable to peaceful relationships with the West at this time. And once the Soviet Union crumbles, that's when the floodgates open to billions and billions of dollars of Russian money coming towards the West. And they desperately want to be part of the Western banking system. And Trump, he's already been dealing with the Russians long before Putin, and he only came under fire from the FBI after 9/11. That's when Robert Mueller, y'all know who Robert Mueller is, right? Please tell me y'all know who Robert Mueller is, okay? So Robert Mueller, he comes into power after 9/11, okay? So at any rate, so after 9/11, right, This is when Trump's world starts falling apart because many of his enterprises start failing miserably, particularly his casinos in Atlantic City, those projects, right? And it was very famous back in those days as well. He starts losing money left, right, and center, and he ended up $4 billion in debt, right? And now this is where the Russians come. This is where this relationship comes in. Remember, we said in the beginning, like he's already working with the Russian mafia. Right? He's $4 billion in debt. No bank will lend him any money at all. They won't lend him any money, right? And he's going through all these bankruptcies and stuff, right? So the Russians, they're the ones who rush to help him out because they are seeing how they can launder their money through Trump and Trump Towers. I mean, like what we said, what did we say? We said the Russian mafia and the KGB, they're pretty much the same thing. Okay, they work together. They work in tandem with each other. They're not working against each other. So if you're working with the Russian mafia, you're working with the Russian government. You get it? You get it? Okay. So Trump, he couldn't get loans from any bank, with the exception of Deutsche Bank. That's the only one that would loan him money because they were famous for doing what? Laundering money from the Russians. Don't worry, family. We're going somewhere with all this. We are going somewhere with all this, okay? So Trump, the Trump-Russian friendship was essentially, in those days, back in 2002, to do anything to save Trump, okay? And there's another individual. His name is, what's his name? Tamer Sapper, okay? He's a self-made billionaire from Brighton Beach. He financed a company called Bayrock, okay? And that company was conceived to save Trump at that time, way back in those days, okay? And they put all the money they could back into Trump to save him so that they can continue, this money laundering thing that they were doing, right? You get it? That's why the Russians were trying to save him back then, right? So now you got to skip forward. And Trump has this long-standing relationship with the Russians way back from the 80s all the way up into 2000, the Russians that saved them. And now around 2012, I think, hold on. When was it? 2013. No, 2012. Okay. 2012. Trump now, he's talking to Putin through characters like Michael Cohen. You know who Michael Cohen is? That's his fixer, right? Another person named Felix Sater, right? Who is another billionaire, but he's also an FBI informant. Okay, this guy's a piece of work. But I digress. That's neither here nor there. The point is, Putin wants to build a Trump Tower in Russia, in Moscow, and Trump wants to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Okay? This around 2012 times. 2011, 2012, I think, right? So they're working out this deal to build the Trump Tower in Moscow. The question is, what happened in 2013 to cause this deal to fall through? Does anybody know? Does anybody know what happened in 2013 to cause this whole thing to collapse? This Trump Tower in Russia. Does anybody know? It was a big major thing. No, it's not the election. It's not the election, Abu Saleh. It's not the election. It's 2013. What happened was Ukraine decides that they want to be part of the UN, and therefore Russia at that point annexes Crimea. That's what happened. And after they annexed Crimea, how did the US respond? They responded with massive sanctions against Russia. International sanctions against Russia, which killed the deal between Donald Trump and Russia. That was in 2014. And then what did Trump announce that same year? He announced his bid for what? To become president. And that's where all this whole thing comes in with Russia. That is the short of it. That's like the real abbreviated version of it. You get it? This really started because of his relationships with mob bosses, particularly Russian mafia bosses. Because when you run for president, the FBI has to do a background check. This is when all the information about his dealings with Russia they really came out, because the FBI now they has to check his background. They're seeing all this stuff going on with Russia, right? And who was in charge at the FBI at that time? It was James Comey. James Comey is like finding all this stuff. You find out all this Russian game. Even Donald Trump famously said, Russia, if you find the email, send them out or whatever. Vladimir Putin famously, Vladimir Putin famously put out the emails that Hillary Clinton was sending through her private emails or whatever, and when it was a big thing. And then Trump got investigated for his relationship with Russia. After Trump becomes president, what does he do? He fires James Comey and he makes Bill Barr the attorney general, which is essentially somebody who's in charge of the entire FBI. And the attorney general now, Bill Barr, suddenly makes this whole thing disappear. Yeah, get it? That's how that whole thing came about. That is the really, 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 really short, condensed version. Okay, I could go into great detail, but that's the short version. You get it? Russia, in fact, really did help him win in 2016. And the only reason why I think they did not help him in 2020 is because they're seeing the juice is not worth the squeeze. Because there's still this thing going on between them and the States with regards to Ukraine. Right? There's still the issue that they basically bail Trump out so that they can keep their money laundering schemes going on out here in the States. But now even Trump Tower is in big trouble because of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump himself, as I mentioned before, he is a real estate and a money laundering guy. That's how he makes his money. That's his thing, right? He's not into the nation building. So it's not that he's a president for peace. He's an opportunist. He's really very devilish. He really is. But he doesn't understand nation building and things of that nature. He understands real estate very well, which is why Jared Kushner, is talking about the prime real estate there in Gaza. You get it? That's what that's about. In terms of Iran now, because the brother he mentioned Iran and the Houthis and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff, right? Now, you guys seen how it's being played out between Israel and Iran, correct? You guys see that when Israel attacks some sort of Hezbollah leader in Iran on Iranian soil, this tired, weak, anemic response from the Iranian government, and then When the Iranian government retaliates and Israel wants to make a response, it's this tired, weak, anemic response from Israel against Iran. Y'all want to know why that is? Y'all want to know why that is? Do you know why that is? I'm about to tell you why that is, okay? The reason, and we touched up on this slightly before, okay? But all of this between Iran, Israel, America, it's all smoke and mirrors. That's the truth of the matter. It's all smoke and mirrors because these countries have, essentially, they have their own national interest at heart. And part of their national interest is this pretend, it's like this really fake animosity. Well, there is animosity, don't get me wrong. It's like a real animosity, but it's a pragmatic animosity. The reality is they've been working with each other since the 80s, all three of these countries. But they can't tell you that. Why can't they tell you that? The reason is that after the Islamic Revolution in 1979 in Iran, Iran was like declaring America their enemy, and because essentially it's a whole heap of history here, but essentially the Shah of Iran before the Islamic Revolution was an American puppet, okay, and he was a hardline tyrant. Okay, so the Iranian Revolution takes place, and then what happens is the Khomeini loyalists, they kidnapped some Americans, okay? And this was under the Reagan administration. Now, Iran is another country that has been involved in nation building since its inception, if y'all didn't know, right? From the times of the Safavids or whatnot, they've always been trying to expand their reach through, violence and whatnot, through this, there's like, but what happened was, again, after World War II, whatnot, the Americans, they put their Shah in, who was, very oppressive. The people got them out. And then Iran, they started their own nation building project, which involved Hezbollah for the Shia and Hamas for the Sunnis. Okay, so Hezbollah is the one that they really supported. They really, really supported Hezbollah. And for the Sunnis, for Hamas, they essentially supported them through suicide bombing, projects, right? Because Hamas really was not something that began with Iran at all. It actually began, believe it or not, with Israel. Israel was the one who created, Hamas, right? So, but I digress. That's neither here nor there. Okay, all right. The point is, Iran was using these militia groups for nation building. Okay, so they have these hostages, and long story short, under the Reagan administration, Ronald Reagan cuts a deal with Iran to release the hostages. And part of that deal was that he was going to arm Iran. And mind you, during this time was the Cold War times. So the U.S. was already supporting Iraq to fight against Iran. This is why nobody can let the cat out of the bag. This has to be top secret. You get it? Because they're already supporting Iraq to fight against Iran. They can't let the secret out that they're supporting Iran as well in order to free these hostages. Okay? That's how it started. But it didn't stop there. During this time, Nicaragua, right, was having some, according to American intelligence, they were having some issues with the Sandistas. So the Sandistas were like a communist type group or whatnot. And Reagan really wanted to quell the communists in Nicaragua at that time, right? But he was not getting any support at all from Congress. So he did this covert mission, which what he was doing, because now he found this new relationship, this new lick with Iran, was that he would secretly sell arms to Iran to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. But it didn't stop there, right? It didn't stop there. They were also, at this time, during the 80s, secretly selling arms to Iran through Israel, okay? And that's why
you are not fit for this game.
This is some crazy stuff. Like, these guys are crazy, man. It's known as the Iran-Contra affair. It blew up in 1986, right, with a man named Oliver North, and he kind of spilled all the beans on this. Right? So they're openly selling arms to Saddam Hussein and Iraq at this time to fight the Iranians at this time, but secretly selling arms to Iran so they can fund the Contras in Nicaragua. So this relationship between Iran and Israel has existed since the 80s, which is why you're finding these anemic responses between Iran and Israel. That's why they're having such weak responses. Do you get it? They've been working with each other since the 80s. They've been working with each other. So then you're probably asking, well, what about these assassinations with Hezbollah and things of that nature? It is because, in my humble opinion, that this golden highway, whatever, that they're trying to build through Saudi Arabia and whatnot, the Iranians want a piece of that. And the Iranians, again, they are really good at this type of, they've had empire for a long, like, centuries, you know what I mean? They had empire for centuries. So if you look at these attacks, how targeted they were, and they came one by one. Why couldn't Israel do this years ago? It's because they didn't have support to do it years ago. But if you look at how targeted that these attacks are, in my humble opinion, it's because the Iranian government, they want to get out of the, whatchamacallit, I guess you could say the terrorist business. They want to get out of that business in order to get a piece of this new pie with this highway between India going up to Europe. They want a piece of that. You're not going to do that without getting rid of Hezbollah or Hamas. So I personally believe, this is just bro science, but the way that it all happened, I personally believe that the Iranian government gave up those Hamas leaders in order to try to get into a piece of that pie. That's what I think. I really don't believe there's going to be any war at all between Iran and Israel. That's something that they say, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that what is happening between Iran and the Houthis is that the Houthis, they themselves have gone rogue, and they cannot be talked to. They cannot be reasoned with. They've completely lost control of the Houthis. You get it? They've been training the Houthis from time, at least 30 years. The Houthis were never Rafida Shia. They became Rafida Shia because of the Iranian nation building project. They started training these Houthis. Right? So Abu Saleh, he's asking, who are the Houthi? Okay, so the Houthis, they're this small tribe in north of Yemen, in the north of Yemen. Okay, there may be altogether maybe about 20,000 Houthis. They're not really that big. Okay, and in Yemen, historically, the Shia in Yemen have always been Zaydi Shia. Right, this is well known. They've historically been Zaydi Shia. And Iran, because they recognize the importance of Yemen because of the Gulf of Aden, if you control that port, if you control the Gulf of Aden, as the brother Mr. Middlepath, he said, you control the logistics of what's going through the Red Sea, right? And the Red Sea goes through the Suez Canal. Suez Canal leads to Europe. So if you control that, you control basically what goes on through the Red Sea. They started this project to radicalize the Houthis. And the Houthis, they're like ignorant village people, the illiterate, very illiterate people, can't read, can't write, they've been in the mountains living for thousands of years or whatnot. And here come the Iranians with their money and whatnot. They trained them in Iran. And they radicalized them. And then now all of a sudden they become Rafida Shia. From Zaydi to Rafida. And trained in military science. So the only thing that was really blocking the Houthis was Ali Abdullah Saleh, right? The longtime president of Yemen, who was another piece of work. He's another, tyrant, right? He's another tyrant. He is the only one that had them under manners, right? But the Arab Spring is what uprooted Ali Abdullah Saleh. And when the Ali Abdullah Saleh got uprooted, that's when you started seeing the Houthis, what all this chaos that they caused in Yemen, right? The biggest humanitarian disaster at that time was caused by the Houthis. Okay, and they started attacking Saudi Arabia, right? Because again, they are an Iranian military, you could say a paramilitary project, right? The Houthis. That's one of them from Iran. The Hezbollah, that's from Iran. Okay. Hamas is not from Iran, but Iran funded Hamas, for their destabilization projects. You get me? So Trump is not going to invade Yemen for a couple of reasons. First, as we mentioned, he's a real estate and a money laundering guy. He's not a nation building guy. The second thing is that we're witnessing the end of the empire, not the beginning, right? So this is the last stage of the American empire. You get me? This is the last stage of the American empire. The American empire is really not interested in enriching Europe at this time. The only benefit that controlling the Gulf of Aden would have for Americans is to send resources back and forth to Europe. Right? But you might be asking, well, what about the oil from Saudi? Saudi is in what we call peak oil. That's why Saudi is changing so rapidly. Y'all ain't catching the joke, okay? Y'all think that Saudi is just changing rapidly because They don't like Islam. No, they're in peak oil. Okay, their oil is finished. And the oil oligarchs are no longer looking towards Saudi for oil. Rather, they're looking towards Venezuela, Guyana, and Alaska right now. They ain't interested in Saudi no more, right? But the problem is that the US dollar is pegged to Saudi oil. That's why it's called the petrodollar. And there are trillions of dollars all over the world that are going to end up coming back to the US, especially after this election, because you have the BRICS nations now, which is going to cause a massive economic collapse. That's coming for sure, 100%. The 100% that's coming. Okay, so when the brother Mr. Middlepap, he's talking about, Saudi Arabia becoming independent. Well, yeah, but the other things that are going on, right? The reason why they're expanding and broadening is because they want to diversify their income, because they understand that the oil wealth, those days are finished. Those days are gone, right? The oil is finished. They get that. That's why they're diversifying so hard. That's why MBS has been given the reins to do whatever he wants. Because the sons of King Abdulaziz Al Saud, they're all old. They're like 90s or whatnot, and you can't run a country like that anymore. Right? So the king of Saudi Arabia is Salman, right? He's the actual king of Saudi Arabia, but he's not running anything. He gave the reins to his son, Muhammad. Okay? He gave the reins to his son, Muhammad, because they understand what's coming. You get it? So if anything goes wrong with Yemen, and things are going wrong with Yemen right now, they're absolutely going wrong with Yemen. Donald Trump is not going to send military, nor any president. I highly doubt any president will send U.S. military to Yemen to deal with the Houthis. I highly doubt that. If they were going to do that, they would have done it years ago. Even before this thing that's going on with Israel. But what they will do through the military industrial complex is that they will just continue to sell arms to Saudi Arabia to try to quell the Houthis. They will continue to do that because, number one, it's much more profitable. Number two, you will not have the attrition from the U.S. citizens from, nation building. And number three, your own citizens don't have to die for your cause. You get it? The guard is changed. The guard of power is changing right now as we speak. What we're witnessing again is the end of empire, as I mentioned before. The U.S. empire is on its last legs. White supremacy is on its last legs. Right? Global white supremacy is on its last legs. And a new age of digital feudalism is now here. The only country right now that is interested in World War III happens to be Israel. And there's not possible for them to do it on their own. They can't do it. Even what they're doing right now, the reason why they're bombing Palestine, bombing Lebanon and whatnot, and they will eventually end up bombing Syria. The only reason why they're doing that is because they don't have the numbers to do a ground invasion of any of these countries. They just simply don't, which will require participation from other countries, especially the US. And Donald Trump, like I said, because he's a real estate guy and he's a money laundering guy, he will quickly start real estate projects to benefit Israel as soon as he gets into power, very quickly. All right, so Sister Tika says, because Guyana got more oil than Venezuela. What I think the US will do is because again, the oil oligarchs right now, their power is waning. It's slipping. And they will try to put their own people in charge of Venezuela and Guyana. The Guyanese president, he's very pro-Guyanese. He's very about his people. So it's going to be very difficult to sway him. So if anything, they may convince the Venezuelans to attack Guyana for that oil. And mind you, Venezuela has oil. They already have oil, and the people are starving. But your shell corporation, U.S. shell corporations, they're the ones who are impoverishing your South Americans right now. So, no, I don't believe that Donald Trump will attack Yemen. And I don't believe that even any U.S. president is interested in attacking Yemen. They're looking at Yemen as an Iranian problem. And the only way they get dragged in is if the pro-Israeli lobbying machine pushes them to attack Yemen because of their blockades with the Gulf of Aden. But as we mentioned before, these folks are trying to build a highway that goes through India, through Saudi Arabia, through Israel, which is why these Gulf countries, they want to normalize relations with Israel because it's economically viable, and it will force Israel to, if they want to do business with these Gulf countries, they'll force them to calm down. They'll force them to behave. But again, you're talking about people who don't have a word that they keep anyways. But Allah knows best, right? You gotta understand, like, the issue between Saudi Arabia and Palestine, again, it's a complicated one as well. Because King Faisal, rahimahullah, he did a lot for the Palestinian cause. He caused a global economic emergency with the OPEC embargo against every country that supported Israel against the Palestinians. And he was assassinated for his efforts. Ever since he was assassinated, whenever something goes wrong with Palestinians from the Israelis, the first people who get blamed, who is it? Somebody put it in the chat, please. Whenever something goes wrong with the Palestinians, who are the first people that the Muslims call out. Somebody put it in the chat, please. Let me know when I'm not tripping. Who are the first people all these Muslims they get mad at? Especially now with the advent of social media, but it really hasn't changed even since I first became Muslim. You know, they've been calling out the same people over and over and over again. Thank you. It's Saudi. Even though arguably the Saudis have done more for the Palestinians than any other group. You know, but they still get blamed when something goes wrong with the Palestinians. Mind you, King Faisal was assassinated for helping the Saudis. He was assassinated. Okay. And not only that, you will find that the general Muslims, they blame everything that goes on in Palestine on the Saudis, which is one of the weirdest. I guess it's just weird. It's just weird. Do you know how many people of Palestinian descent are living in Saudi right now? When I was in Saudi, there's all kinds of people of Palestinian descent from Jordan, from Lebanon, because, you know, you can't get a Palestinian, there's no such thing as a Palestinian passport. So the Palestinians, they would go to these other countries like Lebanon, Jordan, whatever, and they end up in Saudi. You know? So really the Gulf countries, they're kind of tired of this situation. They're really tired of it because whenever something goes wrong in, you know, Palestine, they're the ones that get blamed. And as I said, they arguably do more than anybody else. Definitely more than the Egyptians. Definitely more than the Egyptians. Like more than even the people in Sham, you know. But that's neither here nor there. They want this thing to end. They are getting their weapons from the United States, Saudi, Egypt, all these Arab countries. They get their weaponry from the United States. The only one that's really armed from Russia is probably Iran. Do you get it? But Iran, again, that's the reason why they have these anemic responses between Iran and Israel is because of that secret relationship they've been having since the 80s. They actually help each other. They're not hurting each other. They help each other. You know what I mean? But they're out there pretending that they hurt each other for political expediency. You know what I mean? But anyways, family, again, the short of it is that, again, Donald Trump nor any U.S. president is interested in attacking Yemen. They already, if they want to do that, they would just get the Saudis to do it. Why would you send your own troops to Yemen? Right, on the ground, you know what I mean? The most that they would do is probably, you know, bomb some bunkers or whatnot from the sea, right? But that's in terms of all-out war. No, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And they can't do it anyways because the empire is in full decline. So when the empire is in full decline, you got to expect civil war. We fully expect Donald Trump to be the next president, whether through election, and even if he loses the election, what he will do is that he will fight it in the courts, and he'll probably win in the courts. because as we mentioned yesterday, that the thing that was missing was the appellate courts, which she now has because of Roe versus Wade. So the appellate courts will rig the election in his favor for sure, right? They'll be willing to do that. And then the election rules will completely change. A lot of folks would be disenfranchised from voting, specifically Black people. Anybody who's Hispanic will probably not be allowed to vote. All right, after this election. And if Kamala Harris wins, then you're going to see, in my humble opinion, you probably see civil war or some sort of social upheaval. And if there is no social upheaval, if Kamala Harris wins, it will be instigated from outside forces like BRICS, who will send, as we mentioned before, they're going to end up sending trillions of dollars, US dollars, back to the States, which will cause a whole economic collapse. It will cause a whole economic collapse. You all are going to be spending $100, $200, $300 on a loaf of bread. That's what's going to happen when all that money starts coming back, because they're not going to use the US, they're not going to use the petrodollar anymore. Nobody's going to be spending using the petrodollar anymore. It's going to be useless. And then if Kamala Harris winning don't cause a civil war, that definitely will. You're going to see some real social unrest when that happens. If Donald Trump wins, I have stocks, okay? In my stock portfolio for the whole week, all week long in Canada, my stocks have been plummeting. When I say plummeting, I don't know how many of y'all own stocks, right? But it can't just be me. It cannot just be me, right? My stocks have been like, every election is this type of fluctuation that happens anyways, but not on this level. This is the worst I've ever seen it. It is terrible. When I say terrible, I mean terrible. The stocks is just like garbage. They're doing garbage, okay? If Trump wins, I expect it to be even worse. That's what I expect. If Kamala Harris wins, I expect it to rally. I expect the stock market to rally. So if you have stocks, don't buy. Just do not buy, okay? Or if you're planning on buying stocks, don't buy. Just wait till sometime after the election to do that, okay? Just trust me on this, man. It's like crazy. These stocks are doing terrible, man. Terrible. Terrible. But I digress. Like, subscribe, share. Hit me up on Patreon, family. And I think we're going to be back tomorrow. I'm pretty sure we're going to be back tomorrow. Okay? And Subhanallah, Hamdik, Washada, and Wastafaka, to be Lake, and